helping you with Acorn and RISC OS computing.
Hopefully you can all hear me, and hopefully you can also see the text on the screen.
Yes, to both.
Fantastic. Well, we are on time. I'm going to cover more than just the 64-bit Moonshot topic. I wanted to use today as a slightly more broad update on RISC OS and RISC OS Open, like I would do at any RISC OS show. So hopefully I can cover topics of interest to everyone here. So first up, we've got RISC OS's purpose and RISC OS Open's purpose, where we're about safeguarding the past, present, and future. So I'll look into the recent past and cover a few topics that have been underway. So first of all, one of the things that we have done is we've been looking at what the out-of-the-box experience is for RISC OS. So what do new users think when they try it out, and what are the first impressions? And it's something that we are using to guide a few of the little background bits and pieces that we've been coordinating. So I'll show you some examples. First and foremost, we've got our website, and we've been making quite a few changes there. So we've got our web developer, Andrew Hodgkinson, over in New Zealand. In the last several months, he finished about a month ago, he was making lots of changes to our website. Firstly, to make it work on mobile phones. Secondly, to make it faster, more responsive, and a bit cleaner, easier to navigate. And finally, there are a few changes that we needed to make in response to various bits of online safety legislation. So there's some extra bits that have sprung up and appeared in the forums. When you're posting there, you'll see that we've got some forum guidelines, and we've got some mechanisms through which we can moderate the forum, and people can report posts that they think are not fitting within the forum guidelines. And we're always interested to hear if people have other ideas and suggestions for our websites. So please do let us know if there's other things that you'd like to see us do there. So one of the things I would mention is that it has been tested all the way back to browse on RISC OS. So it still just about works on browse. We've also had an update of the development tools. They've got a slightly complicated number and version number system. We've got the main version number 31, and the little minor updates are given a letter code. So we've just updated to 31F. This is only really interesting to developers. We've added a few little things, fixes and tweaks, but there's nothing major, so we're not pushing this as an update that people should update their DDE to unless they really want to. But one of the things I'll mention is there is a copy of the style guide, the latest edition of the style guide in digital format in the DDE. So if you're not someone who likes having to heft around big tomes like this, you can find a copy that you can read on the computer on the DDE. Also of relevance to developers, there's a bounty that we've had running for a while, which has been making great progress. And this is for a thing called Git, which is a mechanism for controlling source code so that you can go backwards and forwards in the history of source code. You can get to older versions and you can keep logs against each version. You can say what you did, what you changed in that version of the code, and you can compare different versions as well. So it's a very powerful tool. It's used across the software development industry, and the clients that we have got this bounty for is to allow you to interact with Git directly from RISC OS. And there's three ways that you can interact with it. You can interact on the command line in a task window. You can interact with the user interface that you can see a screenshot of here, where you get to see different versions, how they relate to each other, and what the text is associated with them. And you can do a whole load of other operations from that user interface. And there's also a bonus version where it can be navigated through the filer. So you get a different folder for each version of the repository, and you can get, basically you can see a snapshot of everything that was in the repository in each version. directly in the filer. So we've been incrementally releasing trial versions of the Git client as it's been developing, and there was an updated beta released in the last couple of months for people to play with and feedback any bugs that they find. So it's great to see progress there. Also, I did mention the style guide earlier. It was released at a recent show, and it's on sale today on our website. There is a discount for people who are registered developers. It's really a book that's useful to developers to make sure that any applications that they write are consistent with the look and feel of how RISC OS works. So unlike other operating systems where it's a bit more carte blanche and people create user interfaces in all kinds of shapes and sizes, RISC OS is a lot more consistent, which I think is very helpful for people to automatically just get going with a new application they've never used before. So one of the things that we've added here is there's some new toolbox modules like the Tree Gadgets toolbox tool, and we've made a whole load of other corrections and additions. So this is the first update in about 9 years to this book. And I'll move on to the present. So things that are happening at the moment, notwithstanding the Moonshot. We have got a little queue of enhancements that we've been making, as I was mentioning, to how RISC OS looks and feels when you first start it, or to just help with quality of life. And these primarily are driven by us watching YouTube clips and reading reviews online of people who've never used RISC OS before, and they're trying it out for the first time. And there are some really common bits of feedback that come back from that. And that includes where are all the icons? What do all these icons do? And what do the mouse buttons do? There's some of the common bits of feedback. Others are about how it's got this interesting retro look and feel that can be quite divisive, but it's quite popular at the moment. But quality of life, some of the things that we are working on. So we've got things like, I don't know if you can see, there's a little eye icon in the password field there. So we're looking at adding this password reveal tote to password fields in the WIMP so that you can click on it and toggle between the password being hidden and visible, which is just very useful for when you've got complicated passwords and you want to spot if you've done a typo. We're also looking at adding sound effects with certain WIMP events. For example, devices being plugged in and unplugged for USB. I know Rob Sproson's quite an advocate of this, and he was talking about how he's often groveling under his desk and he plugs a USB cable in and he's never sure he's plugged it into the right computer. So it's quite useful to hear the sound, or more so when you've unplugged something, check that it's the right computer. There's a few other ideas as well of things that we can change and improve. So the desktop font has quite a limited range of sizes at the moment. I think it's between about 10 point and 16 points. If you try any bigger than that, it tends to overflow the icon, the toolbar at the top. And that's something that we're looking at improving in the window manager so that you can change the font size to a much more broad range of sizes. That has quite a lot of knock-on effects, but it's quite important because it's another option to make RISC OS more usable, especially if your eyesight, like mine, is getting a little bit worse with age. You don't necessarily want to lower the resolution of the whole desktop just to be able to see more. It would be nicer to make the text a bit bigger. So that's something we're looking at. And another thing I've talked about is the question that new users have about where are the icons, what do they do? One of the things that's a common theme is a lot of operating systems now copied the way Windows has the start menu on the left of the toolbar. And typically you also have applications appearing on the left, and you have filing systems and devices over on the right, which is amusingly the exact opposite of how RISC OS organizes its icon bar. So we have added a feature so that you can optionally reverse that. And I think if my luck holds, you might be able to see here an example of how that works. So we've got a little recording here. Tell me if you can't see it. You should see someone typing in an edit window. Very good. So this is an example of how RISC OS normally looks and the sort of experience that people would normally have. You see some of the strengths of RISC OS is dragging and dropping directly from a save box into a filer window. But here we're going to show you this new option where we can change it. So over here, you can see flip the order of the icon bar icons. So it's just the same as any other configure option. And now the completely alien to me world of the task manager on the left, like the start menu, and all of the applications over on the left. And then you've got devices and filing systems over to the right. Now, to anyone who's a regular RISC OS user, this will be abhorrent and strange and alien. But if you're new to RISC OS, this could be very helpful, in fact, to just make it a bit more natural and easy for you to navigate. So this is something that's in the nightly builds, so the beta releases of RISC OS at the moment. And when we look at the other bit of feedback that we get, the retro look and feel of RISC OS, one of the things that really makes it quite contrasting to a lot of modern operating systems is a lot of modern operating systems and mobile phone user interfaces support dark mode. And dark mode is very popular with a lot of people. It can reduce eye strain, but it's just particularly fashionable at the moment. And so we've been looking at what it would take to have a dark mode for RISC OS. And hopefully I can give you another bit of a demo of what that might look like. Now, this is a prototype, and I'll just leave it playing. And so this is basically the same sequence of actions repeated, but with dark mode. I will say there's a few things to note here. So when the title bar in a window has input focus, we've made it magenta instead of bright yellow here, but it doesn't have to be that. We've also had to change a lot of bits of the WIMP where it had hard-coded knowledge of what color things should be, because they would all go wrong. So lots of tweaks there. And we're going to have a feature so that the operating system can inform applications whether it's in light mode or dark mode, and then they can pick a set of icons that are more appropriate, because you can see quite a lot of these icons look a bit high contrast and strange. But it also might be an option in the future to have the WIMP automatically change icons, and there's a way you can adjust the brightness of icons to make them look nicer in dark mode, even if the application says it doesn't support dark mode natively. So if a particular icon hasn't said I'm dark mode and you're in dark mode, then you could manually adjust the way the icon looks. So these are all things that we've been working on. As I said, there's still more to do, but again, this is something that will kind of make its way into the nightly builds, and hopefully this is something that even hardened RISC OS users will find useful once we've arrived at schemes that look better. And if anyone out there is good at graphic design and likes designing icon sets, then having a native dark mode set of RISC OS icons would be very welcome. There's several hundred of them, so it's a bit of work, but it would be nice to get that. Okay, I'll just skip on from that one and we'll start looking ahead a bit. So the future is why we're talking about 64-bit RISC OS. The future is rapidly approaching and it's not all good news. So RISC OS needs to adapt to survive. And the reason why is all to do with the ARM chip. So back in the beginning, we had the original ARM, which was designed in 1985 by Sophie Wilson and Steve Ferber. And really, they did it on a shoestring, very clever people. And they developed something that was extremely minimal and could run off ridiculously low power, but it threw away lots of bits that were taken as conventional bits of chip design architecture, and it's distilled it down to the bare minimum, the reduced instruction set. And it did a bunch of other tricks as well. Like there's a 32-bit register that holds the address of the current instruction that's being executed. And instead of using all of those bits for the address, because who could possibly have 4 gigabytes of memory in a machine, they used a load of bits in that register to store other stuff, so flags and mode word and all sorts of other bits. And that reduced the number of bits available that could use for addressing memory. So really, that set a hard limit to how much memory you could address in the machine. And that is 64 megabytes, which at the time seemed like quite a lot in the late 80s, early 90s. But as time moved on, that got more problematic. And towards, certainly when I joined Acorn, we were already working to address the fact that 26-bit was running out of road, and we needed to move to a new architecture. I'll just skip on the 32-bit architecture, which is where a lot of that stuff, those flag bits and other stuff, was moved out into its own dedicated register. And that meant pretty much all of the 32 bits in the program counter could be used to address memory. And that meant you could have up to 4 gigabytes of memory in a machine. And this meant you had to change quite a lot of stuff in RISC OS, because a lot of the code relied on the fact that it had all these flags in the program counter and that there wasn't that much memory available. So Acorn and subsequently Castle had to do quite a lot of work to convert RISC OS to run as pure 32-bit operating system. And then we also had third-party bits of software like Emulaw come along to allow us to run old 26-bit code where we weren't able to convert that code directly to be 32-bit. So for example, if we've lost the source code to something, but we still like the application, you can run it under Emulaw, even if it's 26-bit, and it will still work on a 32-bit system. But it did mean quite a lot of sweeping changes. Now, as of about 2011, ARM announced their first 64-bit processor. And this is the year where Rule launched its first bounty scheme, its first bounty. And it was 1 year before RISC OS was released on the Raspberry Pi. So it's 1 year before the Raspberry Pi came out. So we were at the tail end of having published all of the source code to RISC OS under the shared source initiative. And we were starting to support efforts by people like Jeffrey Lee to port RISC OS onto new platforms. And one of them that was happening in the background was the Raspberry Pi port. And the 64-bit era changes a lot in the ARM architecture. And it's a much more hard-hitting change than the 26 to 32-bit transition. So the impact of this change is far more substantial. So you've now got a flat 64-bit memory space, and I'll give you a visual representation of what that actually means. But you have lots more registers to play with, and you, strangely enough, you can't actually directly access the program counter, which to anyone who's used to writing ARM code is a very weird concept. And there's a few other bits as well, technical bits that have changed, but a few fundamental bits of the ARM architecture that a lot of people liked in the original incarnation have gone away. So the load store multiple instructions are gone, and a lot of the conditional execution is gone. And that was used to free up a lot of address space, which means that you can still fit all of the 64-bit instructions in 32 bits. So there's still a 32-bit word with an instruction in it, but it's a 64-bit architecture that instruction is dealing with. So the visual representation of size difference over the years, the progress that we've made with this stuff, if 26-bit memory, that's 64 megabytes, is the size of a postage stamp, then the amount of memory, the 4 gigabytes you could get in a 32-bit system, was the size of an A4 sheet of paper. But a 64-bit system can address something the size of a football pitch. So your original, whatever it might have been, A3000 Archimedes, was a postage stamp on that football pitch. So that is a huge potential. There's lots of things you can do with that much memory and that much address space. But as you can imagine, it makes quite a lot of impact on an operating system. So this isn't just an opportunity, it is a threat. And the reason why I say that is because if you go and look at ARM's website and you look at the architectures, the ARM architectures that they are currently licensing so that people can build them into chips, we can see that the ones that support 32-bit mode and can run RISC OS natively, they're ever decreasing. So we've put a red cross through all the ones that don't support RISC OS 32-bit mode anymore, that you can't run RISC OS on. And there's a few. So if we've got, let's see, we've got the Cortex A32 over in the, I think is the bottom right. Not sure that's even ever made it into silicon, so that's probably not on the list either. The Cortex A53 up on the top right, that's in the Raspberry Pi 5. And that partially supports 32-bit mode. And the Cortex A9 that was in the Panda board isn't even on the list anymore. It's been discontinued. So this list is changing year on year, and the number of X's is going to be increasing, and the number of ones that don't have an X on are going to be gradually disappearing. So the threat is that we'll get to a point where you can't buy hardware with an ARM chip in it that has any support for 32-bit. And if RISC OS doesn't have a solution to that, you won't be running RISC OS. However, it's not all doom and gloom. There's lots of ways to address this. And that's why we announced back in April, I think it was, the Moonshot initiative, which is essentially a drive to build publicity around the fact that RISC OS is has got this problem and is looking towards a solution, or many solutions potentially. And it's also recognizing the fact that in those intervening years between 2011 and now, we've not been able to address this threat organically through the normal shared source, then open source mechanism. So bluntly, there just aren't enough developers in the RISC OS community who are willing and able to work on it for free to make this stuff happen. So it's abundantly clear that something needs to change if we're going to make substantial changes to RISC OS to bring it into a 64-bit world. And part of that is money, and part of that is effort. So I'll talk about technically what we think is involved. We've been collecting for several years now on our wiki lots of technical information describing the impact assessment of what 64-bit means to RISC OS. So what are all the things that would need to change, or that we know would break, or even we might want to add to allow RISC OS to work natively in 64-bit? And it's quite a long list. There's several pages on the wiki dedicated to this, and you can find it if you want. I could share a link later, but it's quite deeply technical, that side of it. But realistically, what we've done is stepped back from all of that, and we thought about, well, if you did a project plan and you estimated the effort, the resource, the time that's required to do all of this and do it well, what would that look like? And we came up with, I don't want to spoil the secret because you already know, but we came up with an idea of how big it was and realized, yeah, this is huge. And it isn't going to happen organically with best will in the world. So we published an open letter on our website, and fortunately it was picked up by various media outlets like OS News and the Register and Hacker.io. And basically that was a call to action to say, hello, RISC OS exists. This is what RISC OS is. And it's living in a world where 32-bit is running out, and we would like to transition to 64 bits. And getting there is large amounts of work. So can you help? And that's really what it was saying. Are you someone who can help as a developer? Are you someone who can help philanthropically funding it? Are you someone who just has good networks and can connect us to people? And that's what the open letter was about. And we've been working with the feedback and the responses that we've had to that ever since. But when I look at what is it that we're trying to achieve, or what are the options, because in that letter I outlined that it's about £2.5 million worth of development work, which in RISC OS terms is insane. But it doesn't have to be. Let's be absolutely clear. That 2.5 million is just planting a flag on the horizon and saying one possible future, one possible path to that future. That's the size of it. But it does set the scene that there's no way of doing it in a couple of weeks. It's going to be big, however you slice it. But let's look at the options. So in high-level terms, we could do nothing at all. We could bury our heads in the sand and say, well, we'll just keep running 32-bit RISC OS until the chips run out, and then we'll all go home, which doesn't really feel in keeping with RISC OS Open's mission. So we're not going to do that. We're going to at least try to find a better way. The next option is emulation. And what that means is you can have something like RPCMU, Virtual Acorn, or even something like QEMU, and you run an emulator on another operating system, and then RISC OS in its current 32-bit form runs on top of the emulator. And to all intents and purposes, it thinks it's running still on 32-bit hardware, but something between it and the hardware is faking 32-bit. So that might be an emulator, or it might even be a real-time translation layer that in real time translates from 32-bit to 64-bit ARM. And these things do exist, although they're fairly academic. So this is a very real option. I mean, I run Virtual Acorn on a 64-bit Windows computer right now. So we know it works. Emulation is a way to do it. But to the best of my knowledge, we don't have a 32-bit, an ARM-based emulator. So I don't know that you can run RISC OS on, for example, a 64-bit Raspberry Pi under an emulator. So there would be work to do on, for example, RPCMU or some other emulator like QEMU that can run on ARM to get RISC OS running on it. Now, there's an obvious downside to emulators in that RISC OS hasn't changed, so it's still just a 32-bit operating system. So it's not benefiting from all the 64-bit goodness that's underneath it. It's not, for example, you can't access huge hard drives, or you can't load a massive movie file that's 7 gigabytes into RAM, because RISC OS will never be able to do that if it's still 32-bit. So emulation is a sticking plaster that gets you something, but it's not in any way fixing RISC OS to be 64-bit. So in a way, it's kind of hiding from the problem. So we don't see that as something that RISC OS Open should do. If someone wants to make Virtual Acorn, RPCMU or QEMU or something work on an ARM-based platform, then that would be very welcome and it would be great, but it's not solving the big problem. And so I don't think it's a good use of our time to focus on that. So that brings us to the final 3 options. The third one is not quite emulation. It's basically you convert RISC OS's operating system, the core kernel, into 64 bits. So you still work on that side of the operating system. And you leave all of the applications and everything else as 32-bit. I don't know if I said the operating system should be 64, but I meant 64. So in that world, you've constrained how much work you're having to do. You've only had to address the core of the operating system. And you've left all of the rest of the ecosystem, a lot of the modules and a lot of the applications as 32 bits. And so it's a lot less work. And there is, for example, there's something that I think RISC OS Developments recently demoed. There's Timothy Baldwin did something that runs on Linux, where it looks like the RISC OS kernel to RISC OS, and it's running in Linux, but it's running all of the rest of RISC OS, the modules and the applications natively. And that's actually a really powerful stepping stone to getting RISC OS working on, for example, the Raspberry Pi 5. So I think that's where ROD are hoping to go with this, because Raspberry Pi 5 is one of those very few ARM chips where it can support the operating system running in 64-bit, but all of the applications can run in 32-bit. It still has some 32-bit support, albeit only for the application side. So I think that's a really useful step. And if ROD pursue that and continue to polish that, then it will get us in the RISC OS community a version of RISC OS that works on Raspberry Pi 5. The big caveat is that it's not just RISC OS. It is Linux running this stuff that Timothy Baldwin wrote, which is pretending to be the core of RISC OS. And then all of the rest of the experience, the applications and modules, they are, well, just the applications really, they are RISC OS, the original RISC OS. So it's a bit, it's important and useful, but it's only ever going to be a stopgap. There's a point where you can't get the chips that have got the 32-bit support at all, and then that runs out of road. You're still in a position where you've got something that's not going to work. So that really brings us to the final two options. And that's where we've chosen to focus our attention, because we know we've got the RPCMU maintainers. We know we've got RISC OS Developments looking at this third option, which is promising, but it's a limited, got a limited life. So the final two options, the fourth one is to do everything. You convert everything to 64 bits, but you don't tell everything that it's got more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. And that means quite a lot of applications and interfaces don't have to change. So you do constrain the impact in terms of stuff you have to rewrite and stuff you have to change. So that could be a useful stepping stone. In particular, all of the addresses would just be in the bottom 32 bits of whatever memory you've got, and everything above that you ignore. And that means all pointers are the same. You can get away with code just running. So it's a good step, and it still involves all of the work that we want to do for 64-bitting, but without a lot of collateral damage in the process. So this might be a good interim goal, is to do this way. And then the final step is, yes, you do all that and you change all of these APIs at the same time. And once you've done that, then you really liberate all of the benefits of having that football pitch sized amount of memory. And for example, if you go down to PC World and try and buy some storage, an SSD or hard drive now, you will be very hard pressed to find a hard drive that's smaller than a terabyte. And RISC OS has a 256 gigabyte limit to storage at the moment. So you'd still be stuck in that world where you buy a 1 terabyte drive, but you can only access a quarter of a terabyte of it. So this is why we're focusing on ultimately the moon, which is option 5. And we're also looking quite hard at option 4, which is a good way to the moon, but it's quite significantly easier. Okay, so one of the concerns we have heard people express, so I've heard this in shows and I've heard this on the forums, is why are you bothering doing this 64-bit? Because at the end of the day, you're going to end up with something that's just not RISC OS. So what's the point? And I say that view is wrong. So a 64-bit RISC OS will look and feel the same as RISC OS now. So you've got the same, as it says here, you've got the same mouse and window behaviors, the same colors, the same icons and windows, and sprite files, draw files, the filing, the file names with the dot separators. It's all there. It's all the same. Just like in the transition from 26 to 32-bit, software will just have extra little clues in it that just says, I am 64-bit safe. So I know how to run on 64-bit. So you'll have some programs that aren't and some that are. And you might have another program like Amulaw that makes 32-bit programs work on a 64-bit computer. So to all intents and purposes, in the same way as going from 26 to 32-bit, still had the same RISC OS out at the end, we see the same thing. A lot of things fundamentally don't need to change. All the devil is in the detail under the hood. So it's the pain is felt by the developers, not by the end users. So I've listed a few here, and I won't go into the details, but there's a lot of things impacted. One of the things that we're advocating, and it's by no means the only way to do it, but there's good reasons, is to translate a lot of the bits of RISC OS that are currently written in handcrafted assembler and rewrite them in a higher level language. Ideally C, but it could be others. And it's a very straightforward thing to do. There's potentially machine translation methods of doing it, although we'd have to evaluate whether what you get out of the end of that is maintainable and understandable to a human. But the main reason you go from assembler to C, for example, is C is a higher level language. And that means it's more expressive and generally easier to read. And if it's easier to read and understand and it's more expressive, then it means adding new features, fixing bugs, and making changes is easier. And a lot more people, a lot more developers in the world understand how to program in a high level language like C than can program in ARM code. So if you've got a RISC OS that's written in high level language, then it's more accessible to developers in order to contribute to changing it and adding things. So as an open source project, it becomes a lot more attractive to work on than something that's an enormous pile of handwritten assembler that very few people understand. So that's a big part of 64-bit, is to just rewrite a lot of things in C, and then you let the compiler worry about generating 64-bit code, because you just feed some C in and out pops your code. That's our biggest ambition here, is to go through all of the difficult bits and make them easier to maintain and easier to adapt in the future. And one of the key things that I want you to take away is this is a big mission and it's going to take a long time to get there, but that doesn't mean it's a big bang where nothing happens until the end. There are lots of incremental points where really useful and valuable things could come out of this work. There's a couple of examples, like if we did all the work on the filing system, we can get to the point where you can support the larger drives and the larger storage. And you could do that even on 32-bit, because once you've rewritten all those bits in C and you've changed those APIs, then there's no reason why we couldn't release them now on a 32-bit RISC OS and get the benefit from them. And there's a lot of different things that we can pick from. So this is an example of the project plans that we created to get to our 2.5 million estimates. what we actually did was we had two people independently take a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach of planning this and thinking, what would it take? And we both came out to within a million or two of each other. The estimate was somewhere between 2 and 5 million. So we plumped for 2.5, but there's good reasons for that, and there's good sound logic. And it's assuming that there are people working on this who aren't all geniuses. They're not able to just churn out code a module a day. They're going to have a learning curve. They're going to have to get familiar with tools. They're going to run into issues with tools and need to sort those out. So there's a lot of work. And that's why we came to this figure. But because there's a lot of work, you can divide and conquer into lots of little bits and incremental steps that are useful and valuable. So I'm going to kind of pull it all together. All of these options where you've got emulators, you've got running on top of Linux where you've got the bit that's pretending to be the RISC OS kernel and then user mode applications natively, like Rod are doing. All of those are useful stepping stones along the road, and we're not precluding any of it. And we're also saying valuable pieces can come out along the way that can benefit users now, and you don't have to have a 64-bit system to benefit from them. And we're also saying there's a lot of different routes that we could take, and it all depends on what the people involved are willing and able to do. So there is no one correct plan now, because it depends on people and their skills. So you will adapt the plan to what the people are bringing to it. And we could get somewhere that's 50%, 70% of the way there, and it would still be good and useful and helpful and beneficial. So we're not going to stop banging the drum for getting to the moon, but we're also not unrealistically expecting to disappear for 5 years with a team of 10 developers and then suddenly at the end go, ta-da! That's also not what we're planning. So we don't have to raise 2.5 million before we can start. We can also get there in steps. And I'll just show you, no, I'll skip over this one. So what is RULE doing right now? What are we spending our time doing? So we are continuing to push the call to action message and trying to get more exposure and reaching outside of the traditional RISC OS community. We're following up lots of leads. So we have had quite a lot of people get in touch and ask questions, and we're looking at people who are looking to help promote our cause. We've had quite a lot of people get in touch who are developers, and they're offering their time, and not necessarily even paid time, could be voluntarily time as well. And these are people that are not from the RISC OS scene. For example, we've had several people that have got involved who used to use Acorn in the past and saw our thing on the register, and they've got in touch since then. And we're also following up leads for potential avenues where we could get funding. So we're looking for the philanthropic side of it as well. And we are focusing on this a lot more than the bounty scheme. So there are a few bounties that are active, but we've got no intention of creating any new bounties going forwards. We want to just exclusively focus our energy onto this side of things, trying to progress this. And personally, I've been working on looking at rewriting the basic module in C, because it's one of our big heavy hitters, hence the user guide being full of errors and corrections. Basic is one of those big enablers where if you can get basic 64-bit, which is what I'm working on, you can also sort out most basic programs. So most basic programs will automatically be sorted out by that. Now, of course, if we change lots of APIs as well, then you're going to have to fix that in the basic programs. But the intention is that we'll have a code base for basic, which is written in C, which is a lot more maintainable. It still runs all the legacy BASIC programs. It still runs on 32-bit machines and runs programs there, but it also runs on 64-bit machines and runs BASIC programs there. And by the way, because it's written in C and it's a lot easier to maintain, adding new language features like structured types or being able to free memory and all sorts of other things becomes super easy, relatively. And there's a lot more people potentially can do that than the current code, which is extremely dense ARM assembler that's difficult to understand. So that's what I've been working on. And we're also continually looking at what we planned and saying, is this right? Can we refine it? Can we improve it? And trying periodically to provide updates on our site to let people know what's happening. But there's always things that we could be doing that we haven't got time to do. And there's lots of questions, there's lots of discussions on the forums that we can't necessarily always keep on top of. So finding more volunteers to get involved and help is always welcome. And with that, I'll wrap and hand over to everyone else to chip in with any thoughts, ideas, or any questions that you might have.
Don't forget to unmute yourselves, everybody.
I must say I'm very impressed with the logic and clarity of that of the plan. That's not just pie in the sky. That looks real.
Thank you. And it is indeed. It's we've thought hard about all the modules, all the APIs, all the applications, where you might have to slot in an emulation layer. We've also thought about iterative stages. So we've thought, what is the first thing you'd want to do? A bare bones, not really much of a HAL, not really any memory management, just a kernel that boots and you get some stuff out of a serial port. And then the next bit is you get some stuff appearing on the screen and you polish the HAL a bit more. And then you gradually start seeing more and more modules initialized in the ROM. So there's lots of different steps and milestones. And in the background, you've got other people working on strands where they're saying, right, well, I'm converting BASIC into 64-bit into C, and I'm working on the file system, and I'm working on some other bits. And they're not at all interrelated, and they can all be kind of brought together later on when different strands are done. So it's very parallelizable across many people. And the question is, well, the main thing is making sure that everyone understands where their piece fits in and that there is a common vision that's binding it all together, that we're all trying to pull in a similar direction. If for example, a load of people wanted to rewrite it in Rust, then that might be quite difficult if there's another group of people trying to rewrite it in C. And we would hopefully be able to at least coordinate those different points of view and kind of arbitrate between them and try and arrive at a consensus. So I see that our role is coordinating and publicizing and helping out, and where we can, developing. But even even my work, there's only so much I can do on BASIC in my own time before I start really worrying about paying the bills. And I estimated this was a 1-year project, and I'm about 6-7 months into it now, and I'm kind of looking at getting more paid work now. So it might have to go on the back burner for a bit. So the funding is important, and that's got to be a big part of what we're spending our time doing, is chasing up these philanthropic leads and finding the kind of the serious funding that can enable a developer to stop and take a pause for 3, 6, 12 months and really make a dent in the work. So, the multiples of £10,000 kind of donations and amounts of funding, they're the types that really move the needle. the donations we've already collected from the community are brilliant, and it's very welcome. And we will certainly pour that into doing something on the 64-bit project. And we really have to find those sources for larger philanthropic contributions. Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned about upping the amount of storage that you can get on RISC OS. Is that a short-term easy goal as such? I don't know how many people would like to have terabytes not split up into quarters and things or whatever.
Yeah, if the funding was there, it would be quite relatively straightforward, because of course we've already got a series of bounties to do with file system work, and all of those are going to get us to a point where we have partition support and probably a better baseline format, a better file switch file core. All of that allows us to get to a point where it's all written in C and it's easy to make it 64-bit. We've improved the on-disk formatting so you can take advantage of large drives. So this is where we see the shortcomings of the bounty scheme, and we see the shortcomings of just doing it open source, is it's never quite had enough money in the pot to really be successful. And it's been reliant, the current claim of one part of the file system bounty is reliant on a developer who's been working on it on and off, but it's been a lot more off than on, because the kind of the minimum wage bounty contribution isn't enough to override their daily priorities. And when they're very busy, they just can't make enough time to progress it. So this is why, if we could just say, well, we've got, 20, 30, 50 grand in the pot, let's just finish all this file system stuff, then it would be a lot more easy to just get that person's time for whatever it takes, 6 months for them to finish it. And the other thing is, behind that, we've got a project plan that's been agreed with that person. So we know exactly what the steps are required to support large storage and partitions. So it's a well understood problem. It's just, it's too big for a bounty, and that's what's proven itself about the bounty scheme.
Yeah, you were saying there about having a length of time work you've been doing. You need a run of time to get things going, and I understand that's very important to get your head into an area and then just sort of crack on that line of thought. So yeah, I can see that anyone who's doing it, well, even part-time, is going to keep spending like weeks to get back to where they stopped last time, to get their head into that sort of space. So I can see, you need that sort of funding to go along there.
Well, that's one thing. I'll tell you very quickly. I'll tell you the story of my experience with BASIC so far. Is I set some very explicit goals at the beginning that I wanted the C version to be clean, maintainable, and written for humans. So what I didn't do is I didn't just go, oh, this is adding 1 to this. So this instruction here in the ARM code is just adding 1 to this. So I'll write a C, I'll do a this plus plus. What I actually did was I largely didn't even look at the source code to BASIC at all. And I have just done clean room. I've been writing what I think the lexer, the parser, the execution parts, what they should do based on my knowledge of how BASIC works, what the reference manual says should happen, and then running BASIC in an emulator in RPCMU and typing little test programs and seeing what the heck happens when I use an indirected value as a parameter in a def statement. And then very occasionally I've had to resort to, oh my God, what's going on? I'll go and look at the source code. But there's points where you get to where it's so mind-bendingly complicated, and this is going to be the case for a lot of the hard-hitting parts of RISC OS. First of all, you have to really get your brain into that space. You're juggling this very complex abstract machine in your brain, and you just go at it 7 days a week for a while, and then eventually you feel a bit burned out and you take a break for a few weeks. And then you come back to it and you don't understand how any of it works again, and you have to get back into it. And that's another thing that happens in complex software engineering, is you can't just go at a constant rate. So yes, you go at a learning curve and then you get going and you kind of cooking. But then there's dips, and then there's peaks of like spurts of really motivated energy, where you understand everything and you can see a clear picture. And there was other bits where I was just sat there and I just had to just stop for a few weeks and just think about it and think, how am I going to solve this problem? I refuse to look at the source code and see how Sophie Wilson did it. I'm going to figure it out for myself. And you don't necessarily have to take that approach. I'll stress that. You could be more sensible than I am, and you could just say, actually, I think the ARM implementation is sensible. I'll just kind of replicate that and tidy it up a bit. But I know from working on BASIC over the years, I know that it is one of the most opaque bits of ARM code in RISC OS, because it was written by Sophie Wilson, and she wrote it hand in hand with designing the ARM architecture. So every trick that is possible has been exploited, and those tricks do not translate to C at all. No. So it's been fun, but it's it shows how there are peaks and troughs in development.
No chance of getting Sophie to come back and help out a little bit.
Bit of weekend work.
Sophie, to be fair, is super responsive, and she is always happy to chat. So that's brilliant. So if we, whenever we get to the point of adding new language features to BASIC, I will definitely be bouncing ideas off her and getting her input. There's a few others as well, like Richard Russell, that I'm very interested in their opinions. If it's about how BASIC is going to develop into the future, I really value their input.
Is that something you could use as tagline for getting programmers in? Talk to world experts.
Well, you're touching on an idea that we're thinking as part of the promotional aspect of what we're doing. What we're hoping to pull together is a few YouTube shorts, and not necessarily just YouTube, but little 30-second bits that are talking about specific areas of what the heck is RISC OS? Why do we love RISC OS? And what's this 64-bit challenge all about? What's this Moonshot all about? And we could hopefully nab a bit of involvement from the Sophie Wilsons, the Steve Ferbers, the Eben Uptons of this world, and get a few relatively famous faces on those videos. And hopefully that will also increase the exposure.
I think the other thing is possibly as well, I think we're very much a European OS, aren't we, really, apart from Australia and New Zealand.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
But I was thinking, obviously the Museum for Computing History and places like that, if they can all be sort of given the word about, yes, it's still here, and we're now looking at 64-bitting it, does your Amiga do this, sort of thing.
So. I just saw a comment in the chat, get them to do TikToks. I have to teach them some dances.
It has to involve lots of arms, so possibly an Indian one, because it's got more arms, hasn't it, the Indian dance? Just a few thoughts.
But that's great. Good suggestions.
Dave,
any other questions? Hi.
A general question. What about multiple core? Are we looking at part of the future?
Yes, it's definitely a part of the future, and no, it's not part of the 64-bit Moonshot. However, once you've got rid of most of the ARM code in the operating system, it makes it easier to understand the impact and to make changes like multi-core support. It becomes a lot less painful to do. So multi-core support will inherently involve writing more ARM code at the bottom level of it. but it's in a very contained way. But we don't see multicore as an existential threat to RISC OS, because whatever happens 20 years from now, ARM chips will still be able to run single-threaded stuff on a single core, even if they've got 512 cores in them. So RISC OS won't be killed by the lack of multicore support, but the end of 32-bit will be a big problem for RISC OS. So that's where we're focusing our energy. Hopefully that answers the question.
I see your point. The other thing, any concern with things like, I know Jeffrey Lee have been doing multi-core, some multi-core. Yep. Obviously, there's certain things like certain software, like web browser, possibly, or backup software, or some other things that would benefit from being offloaded. If we could,
yeah.
But
I don't disagree at all.
Obviously, I see it doesn't fit in yet with your 64-bit.
Yeah. I don't disagree at all. The benefits of multicore are obvious, and obviously with the way Moore's laws kind of run out to a large extent, people are getting more power out of a processor by chucking more cores into it now, rather than by just bumping clock speed. So if you want more power and you want more compute happening, then you need to be leveraging all those lovely cores, and RISC OS can't. So yeah, very beneficial, but not existential.
I've got a question that's not quite a long way from the moon. It's definitely back here on Earth. It's the dark mode.
Yes.
I still use NetSurf.
Yep.
I'm not ashamed of it. It's still my favorite browser. And I use NetSurf to view the forum. And I view the forum in dark mode. But whenever I change forums, I get blinded by a white screen. Then it goes dark. Is that anything you can comment on?
I can guess. I can't tell you the actual answer, but I can guess that NetSurf's window background color is the default window background color. So it's kind of a light gray. So it's probably between pages. It's probably clearing its window and flashing. That would be a complete guess at what's going on. What we're hoping with the dark mode, and no doubt NetSurf will be able to take advantage of that, is that the operating system will have some mechanism to tell applications, or that they can inquire with the operating system. Maybe there's a Wint broadcast that gets sent around that says, I've changed into dark mode, I've changed into light mode. And then applications can adapt their color scheme accordingly. And for example, NetSurf would then be able to say, well, you better use a dark gray background color for my main window when I'm in dark mode.
Okay, I'll try writing to the NetSurf forum, see if they can have an interim solution. In the meantime, I close my eyes whenever I change forums.
Oh dear.
Well, I mean, watching sort of late at night and the room's dark and I've got a dark mode on, and suddenly, wham, the whole screen lights up. Then it goes dark again. It's just.
I think if and when we've got this dark mode stuff into RISC OS, I think there'll be an ever decreasing, hopefully, number of those edge cases that suddenly, whoa, dear.
Okay.
Why is edit so white?
I haven't tried it in Iris. I suppose I should.
Yeah.
Just a quick question on the WIMP and the icon sets. You were talking about dark mode earlier. Is there a restriction on the amount of colors that you can use on icon sets? Because I noticed that most of them only have 16 colors.
So no, there's no restriction at all. You could use 16.7 million, 24 bits of color if you want in the icons. One thing you have to be careful of is we tend to try and be backwards compatible. So especially the lower DPI icons, they typically more constrained color palette. And the higher DPI ones, you can be a bit more relaxed about them because old computers wouldn't have been running those higher DPIs. So typically you try to have a richer palette for the higher DPI. And one of the things that hopefully would come from let's say, a WIMP rewritten in C is to allow vector graphics for icons instead of just sprites. That would be a nice future. And then that would suggest a much more scalable desktop experience where you haven't got fixed size icons for window furniture and all the rest of it.
Yeah, because I noticed
Nemo had done that. I thought Nemo had done that with his, if he ever releases it.
Yeah, that would be interesting to find out.
Yeah, he's got draw files in his sprites. I know that.
Yeah.
He's not here today,
Martin.
I think.
No, I was just going to say, I noticed on your dark mode screenshot that there was a white outline around the icons against.
Yes, that's another feature. It was only fairly recently in RISC OS 5 that we got the alpha channel support for sprites. So you could have the ability when you're creating a sprite, and I think it's only recently come to Paint as well. But the idea of creating an image with a sprite that blends into whatever's behind it is quite new and difficult to achieve on RISC OS compared to a lot of other operating systems where this has been normal for a long time. So a lot of the icon sprites that you see, they're always designed with a light grey background. And so the blending is done manually to a light grey. So that's one of the problems with pretty much all of those icon sets, even when you move into a dark mode. Even if you did some transformation in the WIMP that was automatically making them dark mode. And I did a load of experiments and found out that if you move it into an HSL color space and you invert the L, then that gives the best visual result. So you could do that automatically in the WIMP. You'd still end up with this fringe around the edge unless you manually create the sprites.
I noticed I had a lot of playing around to do with the Iris browser when I was recreating the UI structure of it, and it was absolute pain.
Yeah. So I think with the latest version of Paint and the latest kind of RISC OS 5 WIMP, then you have the potential to have sprites where they're blending out into transparent rather than blending into light grey.
Yes,
but that doesn't help all of the icons that already exist.
No, they would have to be recreated. Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
A question in the chat, Steve, for you.
Let me have a look. Some people don't like dark mode, but agreed. It's to taste, so you'd never switch it on. If Paolo's got a dark mode, and you've got a variable for it. Oh, yeah, okay. That sounds useful and interesting. So given that you've got already an established system variable for it, then that would be useful.
Yeah, that's because basically people that develop themes, they have, the light variant, the dark variant, so they are variant over the same theme, right? So do you want to have a separate variable, given that you actually guys already are using a variable for the current theme? So I just extended what you guys have done.
Yep, okay. Need to remember that. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. But I think there still needs to be a broadcast message as well when the theme changes.
Yes, of course. I personally use mode change. I don't know if that's the official way you want to do it, but I think mode change is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've not thought about it, to be honest, but yes, that's one way. Great. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I don't know how long we've got. I'm happy to keep taking questions.
Keep going as long as you want.
I have a technical question, if that's okay. So one of the things that we observed, and I think I mentioned this on the forum as well, one of the things that we observed in the last few years is that quite a few people are porting applications from Linux, let's call it Unix, to RISC OS. This is cool, but obviously there are plenty of issues in that field. Now, I'm not asking for preemptive multitasking or this thing, because my understanding is that what Rule wants to do with the 64-bit work is to transition the current RISC OS as is to 64-bit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I agree, because you limit the number of issues, right, to just the language, the bitness, and whatever. But what about the 64-bit API? Will it look like the current one as much as possible? Obviously, AArch64 doesn't actually offer the same exact SWI mechanism. Or is Rule willing to start looking at a more standard API? Sorry if the question may sound a bit controversial. I don't want to cause any hard discussion.
No, I know what you mean. You worried that this could be a flame war.
Yes, exactly. So,
well, I want to just restate something from a bit earlier, that we have done a lot of work on planning what the 64-bit looks like and the size of the tasks and the difficulty. But the important thing to remember is what we've planned doesn't ever survive contact with reality. The reality is that what are the people who are actually involved willing and able to do? And if we have people involved who are contributing to it and making progress on it, and it's really important to them that actually, while we're doing this, can we also do this? And they're doing the work as well, so it's not someone else mopping up the collateral damage, then we're not going to say no. So that's why I don't want to be really explicit and say the thing that comes out of the end of the Moonshot is just RISC OS today made 64-bit. There's still lots of things that we might say, well, actually, while we're at it, let's just support vector icons. Let's just fix the way multitasking works. Or that's not a let's just, it's enormous, but you know what I mean? There's things that, to all intents and purposes, are optional if you consider we could just replicate exactly what we've got and make it 64-bit. It's like, do we support large file systems or not bother to start with? They're all available as things for the taking, and it depends on who's there and how much backing those people can get in order to do useful work. So we're absolutely not set in stone of, no, that's a functional change, so we're not doing that. We're absolutely, it's like with BASIC. I'm taking the approach of I'm putting 64-bit integers in BASIC right now from the outset because it would be mad not to. But I am stopping myself from doing lots of other things. I've got a big list of things that I want to add to BASIC, but I'm deliberately not doing them at the moment. But they'll come. So it's the same with the operating system.
Yeah, just my little 02 cents here, because the RISC OS 64-bit API does not exist, so there is no software that uses it right now. So there is a chance here to implement a POSIX-like API that has the double advantage, well, triple advantage here. First, obviously, makes the porting of Linux application easier, and then when there's going to be a preemptive multitasking, we are basically very close to what a Linux application would expect. Second, it becomes an API that can also be reused on the 32-bit because it's not another API that is ARM AH64 specific. And therefore, people that will start migrating their application, they don't have to maintain one for the 32-bit and one for the 64-bit. And then obviously, finally, for the very long term, it will make the entire operating system far more portable than it is now, even on future platforms, if they prove to be valuable for the community.
Yeah.
And hence, that's why I'm mentioning this. I don't want to tell you what to do. I never do that. But, you know, there are reasons why certain suggestion may be useful to you guys to look into. And then you may say, but you know what, I like the way RISC OS has always worked for the last 30 years. I want to just keep that. I already, as you know, I already took my decision, so I'm already working on my own thing because I'm just seeing, the way I see this whole thing should start from what people are actually willing to do on RISC OS today, in terms of what applications they want to use, or what application they want to develop or port, right? So it's all from a community standpoint and not from an existing operating system standpoint. The operating system is an enabler technology, but that's all it is, right? It's the applications, is what people want from it that truly matters. And all the big, let's call it this way, big developments we've seen in the last few years on RISC OS, they all are porting of stuff from Linux side. I haven't personally, maybe I'm just because I don't follow it like super constantly like you guys do, but I haven't seen any major application being released for RISC OS in many years now. That doesn't come from Linux or is not one of the old application being refreshed, being ported to 32-bit RISC OS. I don't see new big developments. So
yeah,
that's my 02. And then last bit, then I'll shut up, I promise, about the basic interpreter. Have you actually had a look at using bytecode interpreters?
Yeah, like Java.
Not like Java, but like if you look at, for example, Lua is also a bytecode interpreter, or also Python, they're all bytecode interpreter.
Yep.
If you want, I can share my screen, give you a quick demo on RISC OS, and performance-wise, you really want to look into those because one of the things I did on RISC OS is called Ultima VM. It literally kills all the super optimization you mentioned that Sophie did on BBC Basic. And that's because those optimization, unfortunately, have very little value when the architecture of the interpreter is very old and outdated. So if you want, I can do it. I'm not forcing anything.
Yeah, I'd suggest you and I have a call separately and we can go into more detail about that. But yeah,
sure.
I have looked at how Python and Lua work as part of the basic work. But yeah, we'll have a chat offline if that's okay.
Of course.
It's certainly interesting.
I think it's BBC Basic has to survive, but it has to survive in a modern way that is as performant as possible. Because people want, for example, they want to develop games and all these kind of things, which, that regards performance. I mean, it's very, there is very little to do. Anyway, thank you very much for the answers.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Steve, another general question. Obviously, it might be a future thing again, but one of the things RISC OS lacks is any form of security, if you want a better term, in terms of internet access nowadays. In terms, we don't have a firewall, we don't have sort of thing. So we're, although we're a small market, small markets are becoming more popular with certain bad guys, if you like.
I just saw the comment in the chat. But yeah, I agree with you. And there's a lot of architectural insecurity in RISC OS. And we do think that we need to address quite a bit of that in the 64-bit work. So I think there's some fundamental bits of what RISC OS can OS, anything, anywhere can just say, oh, I'm super user now, just because. So there's a few things that we just think we can't turn a blind eye to anymore. And so part of the 64-bit work, when you're meddling down in the guts of how RISC OS works, you probably want to sort those things out. So this is why, Paolo as well, this is why, and Martin, there's no reason why we wouldn't consider doing these things that are not necessarily exactly within the scope of 64-bit, they're slightly outside it, but they're just, you look at the operating system as a whole and say, what do you want this operating system to be in 5 or 10 years? And it's not a pure translation of the 32-bit thing into 64-bit. It's got to be more than that. But then how you do all that stuff is very dependent on the people that you've got working on it and what they're interested in, what they've got skills in.
Security is a very complicated argument. I get paid to bring security into companies, and I can assure you that I have a lot of engineers screaming at me all the time because sometimes things gets very complicated for them.
Yeah, that's true. It's a specialist discipline, and there's a lot of ways to shoot yourself in the foot. So non-experts, I certainly wouldn't try and write an encryption layer or anything like that. I know that I'm not an expert. So yeah, you're right. When you've got the right people involved with the right skills and knowledge, then it's going to help enormously. But again, there's fundamental stuff that even we can see that's just not right, and we should probably fix it.
Only if you promise with your blood to not get mad at the security expert, but yes.
That's I can't promise that. You're going too far now. There's always a big battle between usability and security, and there's never a right answer.
Well, there is. RISC OS has got it, and in my view,
Very, very true.
The Mac is the very opposite. I can't touch it. You can't do anything to damage it. You can't do anything. But with RISC OS, it's just like rock climbing. If you want to jump off the ledge, it's up to you. And I think RISC OS is like that.
I'll observe something though, and this is heresy. I've been using Windows 11 quite a lot during development.
Yeah.
And this is amazing. And also Windows systems for Linux and various other things. And interestingly, no matter how I cock up something writing BASIC and testing it, no matter what I do wrong, I've never managed to hang this machine. I've always managed to just go, oh, eventually it either just says, oh, I've crashed in just BASIC, or at worst, I have to close a window. It's like RISC OS, every time I go over to the titanium and I try doing something, oh, there's an hourglass. Oh, outbreak. Oh, no, I just better reset. There's just so many things like that where you just realize that's one of the impacts of inherent insecurity in the architecture, is just the ability to trample all over someone else's memory or get stuck in a loop in a way you just can't possibly get out again. And these are things that would be nice to sort out because they do hurt the RISC OS experience.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because obviously this has always been, they do our RISC OS experience, especially because when somebody new that has no clue about all this subtleness, let's call them that, needs to be taken care of, right? They just go like they would on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS, and they cripple the system and they just go out of it like it's just crap. Not that it is, because I love it, but it's just delicate, fragile, and so on and so forth. So yes, has to be put in place.
It's super lean. You put it that way. It's very lean, and it doesn't put anything in your way. That's and right. if you do something wrong, it will allow you to reap the consequences.
Exactly. That's a very good British.
No seat belt, no airbags.
Yeah, that's the art of British understanding, right?
Yeah.
Just
the British interpretation.
Yeah, the art of British understatement. Yes, it's very lean and extremely lean. So it needs a bit more like. By the way, sorry, not self-advertisement, because already on GitHub you can use it. Check for corelib, which is a C library expressly written for DDE that does all the parameters checking, so data types and value checking. Instead of calling SWICE directly, you have a sort of POSIX-like library usable in DDE. Corelib, yes. I'm still working on it. Yep. Actually, the name just came up last night with after Spro's suggestions and a bit of fight. Some of the name were like StrongLib or SafeLib or RISC OS. That sounded like, the opposite of the British understatement. It was like, I'm being too bold. We're being too bold here. But yeah, so corelib is basically, it's going to be like an OS lib, a safer OS lib for the current RISC OS. So
nice.
It's still on development, but free everybody to use it and test. It comes with tests. I know. I keep banging. I know. Comes with tests. Yes.
Another thing, really sort of, obviously, I think there's partly a bounty for some of this, but how does the bounty for, say, the Samba and NFS? Obviously, we're running on a very insecure version of Samba 1 at the moment, which is pretty much being pushed out of the way. How does that look? Will that still be worked on through for 32-bit and then have to presumably be enhanced for 64-bit?
Yeah, hopefully, in the long run, it would be on the list. Sorry, I say hopefully. It is on the list of modules for 64-bitting. The reason I say hopefully is I look at what's happened with the bounty right now, and it's not made a lot of progress or enough progress. And it just shows that it's been very difficult to kind of drum up the development needed to bring it to a more modern version of the protocol with more modern security standards as well. So if and when we secure larger amounts of funding, then it's on the list, like all the file system stuff's on the list. So quite a few of the existing bounties would...
say partly because I'm thinking of the fact that I think Microsoft are planning to get rid of Sample 1 completely shortly, but they've been trying to ditch it for nearly 2 years, but keep it going for people like the NHS who are still using Sample 1 in a lot of places. But the thing, obviously, it's one of the things I think lacking with RISC OS is interoperability with other operating systems, and Samba and NFS are probably the two main ones.
So I think quite a lot of the bounties will end up...
Backups also, I have to deliberately downgrade it, which is not exactly good.
A lot of the bounties will find their way into being subsumed into the 64-bit work as a consequence of, you rewrite this thing in C, you might as well sort out a few other bits while you're doing it, or similar to that. I had Spro around here a few weeks ago, and I was playing with a Titanium, and I thought, right, well, I'll just use LAN first to transfer stuff back and forth between this Windows machine and the Titanium. And as he was telling me all the different things I had to switch off and registry changes and security features that I was disabling, as I was working through them all, I just went, no, I can't do it. And I put it all back and I just gave up on it. And I just used CloudFS instead. So I got CloudFS and started using that, because I just, as you say, what we've got at the moment in RISC OS for
pCloud,
it's getting harder and harder to even convince a modern computer to support protocols that old and insecure.
We haven't been able to use pCloud for...
pCloud stopped working now.
Yes, he did bend my ear about that recently. It's very unfortunate. pCloud have done a typical commercial vendor thing, and they've changed an API without really helping Spro. So it's a fundamental thing that means CloudFS isn't working properly anymore.
But it means I can't communicate with the Mac now from the RISC OS apart from through email. I write myself letters and with attachments. It's crude.
We have to. I think hopefully Spro can continue badgering the people at pCloud to sort out their API, because we know what the RISC OS port needs. We know it can do it somehow, but their documentation of their APIs is kind of stuck in stasis many years ago, and they've changed it loads of times since then. And just this one key feature, they've just switched it off, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, I know he's been updating his website every couple of weeks with an update from them, but I think they're just not responding to the tickets.
Yeah, I think it's they were one of the few cloud file system providers that had an API that allows you to say, I open an enormous file in the cloud, and I'm going to change these bytes here in the file. I'm going to change some stuff 1 kilobyte in. All of the other ones, like Dropbox and everything, their APIs, if you want to change anything in a file, you just have to upload the entire file again. It doesn't matter how big it is. You can't seek to points in files and change. So that was one of the unique aspects of pCloud, which is very close to how RISC OS's file systems work under the hood, which is why it was absolutely perfect for Spro to choose pCloud, because their API meant you could almost have a clean layer straight through the file system out into pCloud. But because they've broken that one bit of crucial behavior, and they're not helping him fix it, he's a bit stuck.
Fortunately, I've refused all the offers from pCloud to spend a fortune to become a life member. I'm still on the free version, so I got no real complaint that it stopped working. But if I'd spent 50 or 100 quid to get lifetime membership or whatever, I'd be really furious.
It's a shame. It's a shame, isn't it?
It is. It's. But hey,
I'm not. I'm just temporarily acting as a spokesman for Spro. I'm sure.
I'm not getting at Spro. It's not his problem. Yeah. It's my problem. Anyway.
Oh, well, it's P-Cloud really. Yeah. I've been witness to a call with them, and it's a bit unfortunate that they're not being more helpful. It'd be very easy for them to be more helpful.
Yeah.
Well, it's been good. Are there any final thoughts or observations?
Is it worth us starting our own sort of cloud version then? Or our hosting company is really expensive?
I wouldn't want to try.
No.
I've no idea what's entailed. To me, it's a network with some storage on the end of it. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, it's also a privacy nightmare. You need to have people, certify your SOC 2 and GDPR and all this stuff.
Yeah, see, someone who knows.
Yeah, sadly, can't just plug a hard drive into the internet, an Ethernet cable into a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah, I was nearly going to suggest earlier when you were saying about working with Spro, a modern day version of SneakerNet. It used to be a floppy disk. It's now a USB stick, and so I'll put it here and plug it in yours.
Yeah, we've got a comment in the chat about you could use a NAS.
Yes. Yeah.
So a lot of NASs are Linux based, pretty much all of them, and you can run NFS on NASs, and you could probably. Yeah.
I guess
convince Landman Fuss, sorry, not Landman Fuss, but Omni Client to communicate with the NAS.
So I could probably go from Mac to a NAS and from NAS to RISC OS, but I can't get from the Mac to RISC OS directly anymore.
Yeah, you can also use a Raspberry Pi in the middle running Linux and follow the instructions that I published. That makes Samba completely compatible with all version of Omni Client, all the way down to RISC OS 4 and 3.7 on the RISC PC.
If you could share a link to that in the chat, that would be great.
Sure. I keep doing it. I mean, I don't want to sound like Nemo that self-advertised, but given that people are having troubles.
I use that and it works.
It's just one thing I'm aware of is quite a lot of people don't look at the forums. So if there's conversations there, and there's other people like me that kind of, I have moments where I'm able to spend a lot of time on the forum, and then other moments where I can't spend any. So I end up being out of date.
So it's a bit technical. So maybe we can make some pre-built image but I know for a fact that Andrew Ronsley is basically using this to give you guys the NAS that is compatible with RISC OS. 2 years ago, I spent like 2 hours on the phone with him, making sure that he had everything. And it configured Linux on the Raspberry Pi, also to be seen by Windows 11 with the WSD new service. So you keep your Windows 11 at the maximum security, your Linux client and macOS at maximum security, but they still talk with RISC OS. And if you run it as a ch-rooted service, is also very safe. I shared it a long time ago, but I keep sharing it. It really solves the problems at the source, and you no longer have any issue.
Paolo, it sounds like you've got a side hustle here where you could just charge people to set it up for them.
On eBay, the little SD card on eBay, 5 quid.
I must say, I'm actually using Open Media Vault on the Raspberry Pi 3. I've got a couple of 1 terabyte drives, which are plenty for me. And it's very successful. I access those via Omni Client or Landman 98. I can also access them via NFS. And of course, since that's a dedicated thing, you can wind the security all the way down to SMB version 1. It's only available on my LAN. It's not available to the WAN except through a VPN. I've got a VPN server running on another Raspberry Pi. So yeah, NAS, very simple, very cheap NAS, as long as you don't want huge performance, is very successful for me. So I can commend it to other people.
Yes, as long as Samba version is not more recent than 4.17 something, which I shared on my tutorial there. The last ever version that supports Samba 1, SMB 1. As long as you have that, there are other configurations that makes life a lot easier, and there is the WSD service, which is required now to make Windows 11 see Samba instead of NetBEWI or NetBIOS, etc. So there are other things, but yeah, as long as you have an SMB, a Samba that is 4.17.13 or something, you should be fine. More recent than that, you will have problems because they literally removed the support for Samba 1. SMB 1, sorry. So that's why people are having troubles, and that's why we need to move to SMB 3.
I think there's different levels of technical kind of know-how to solve these problems, and for the people who aren't necessarily as used to writing base scripts and hacking away on command lines and things and programming SD cards, it feels like there's a service that could be provided generally into the community where we help people with these sorts of things.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, but
Maybe
it's been a... Go ahead.
Rock. Explain some of these things, but yeah, one thing that there's been recent developments with printer, because obviously the printing area is one area that there's been a long-standing problem because of modern printers. You have to use PostScript printers, or of course somebody who might be on the list here who's done some work with IPP air printers and that. It would be really good if that could be built in to the current printers or added an add-on or a separate thing as standard, so that everybody can actually give us more access to far more printers. Again, it's sort of
that's me.
If you know what I mean.
I am the person that wrote that. Having said that, I got it so far, discovered something that didn't quite work, and I couldn't figure out what was going wrong. There was something that was, when it was getting data back in, it was something was being corrupted, and I could not for the life of me see why. At that point, I just got burned out, and all the code is still here, and that's as far as it got. But it always was written with the intention that it could be offered to go into RISC OS. And if at some point I get the energy to have another look at it, I really must take it further this time.
Well, no objections from us. Obviously, all the printer stack is open source now, so if people want to extend and adapt it, then it's all there. It's not something that I would personally probably have much involvement in, given the Moonshot stuff that's already consuming time. But it's very welcome because, as you say, the existing printer stack that we've got in the disk image is pretty dated now, pretty limited.
Yeah, no, I accept you've definitely got higher priorities, and I'm glad you're going for them.
Great, thank you.
And just a point about the help you're saying that with NASAs and stuff like that, because there aren't user groups in the sense that there used to be, where you could actually go and talk to somebody who can poke your machine and load software and things like that. I think people would be prepared to pay for a service that sets something up for you, however that could be done. So,
sure.
Could be a way of getting free coffees or money. I don't know.
Beer tokens.
Coffee and custard donuts, I mean, otherwise...
There you go. Every man has his price. No, but I sometimes feel guilty that we don't seem to spend a lot on the OS and the bits and bats around it. So, help could be one of the things currently that would, help in lots of different ways.
Sure, I can image one of those little NAS that I created here for Peter. The problem is that the general user, Peter, will probably require some web UI or something where they can change the name of their machine or something, because otherwise,
right?
So the problem right now is that you need to know a bit of Linux, right? So even if I give you the image pre-built, you still need to go there and mess around, because your Raspberry Pi may be called something else, or you have a different IP, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So I need to figure out a UI for it. Oh boy, it's becoming a project. I know that one.
Yeah, but as I say, if you were getting money for offering a service, and that service is reasonably self-configurable, and doesn't eat into your time, that's a real thing. Obviously, we're very aware of. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
yeah, sure.
But lots of us are, as I would say in skiing terms, on the lower slopes of understanding. So, the easier it can be made for us, in a way, the more we're happy to pay for something that to somebody else seems like, why are you doing that?
Yeah. So I'm just out of another big project for the RISC OS community, which is a huge set of plugins for WordPress that makes now WordPress completely compatible with NetSurf all the way down to Bros. Mm-hmm. And the first website is live, so people want to play with it. And it gives you mobile phone themes as well as desktop, whatever, all cool modern stuff. And then you have also this plugin that allows you to have your GitHub statistics on your website and YouTube channel stuff on your website and all these things. So I'm a little like right now, and I still have a lot of things to bring at the London show, and one of it, which is the ShareFS rewritten in Rust for Linux, Windows, macOS, and BSD, which a lot of people want. And that should solve once and for all every issues with this file sharing stuff, because it's the RISC OS side that drives, not the Windows side that drives at that point. And actually, Steve, another probably thing you want to have a chat, because I improved the ShareFS as well. It's only the server protocol. I already started to mention it to Spro, by the way, so he's aware. But I didn't touch anything client side also because, dear Steve, where are the sources?
Oh, ShareFS.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I know where they are.
Oh.
I think they're in James Burns' loft.
Oh, I see. No, because my dear Steve, I had to reverse engineer the entire protocol.
Yeah, it was an amusing that James many years ago volunteered to update ShareFS. He's not going to forgive me for saying this. And he got started by digging out where all the sources were, and they were all put onto some RISC OS machine. And then he moved to Japan, and his house was rented out to a friend, and the machine was put in the loft. And then years have passed.
Yeah, I see. Okay, well, I'll finish the reverse engineering, but yeah, it's already working on the RISC OS 5, and it goes all the way down to RISC OS 3.10. It's fully rewritten in Rust, multi-platform, runs on Windows for ARM and x86 and all these things. And it's going to be officially presented at the London show, also because I will need people to give it a test. It's a file sharing, guys, so you don't want to mess with the file sharing. So there's going to be months of testing, and you have to test it. Don't go install it and think everything is fine, because everything looks like it's fine.
Yep. I'm going to be saying those same words whenever this basic makes it out. There will be many edge cases and many bugs.
Exactly, especially because it has a translation layer from Unicode back to Latin 1 to avoid people to start looking at funny business. It's command line only based for now. There's going to be a UI at some point, but yeah, there is a lot of things going on. So that's plenty of things already going on for free to the community. But for the NAS for RISC OS, I think I have an idea how to stick a UI that I may make it to work on NetSurf. I hope so. So we can maybe go from there, guys.
Yeah, well, I'd personally like to say I don't understand all the technical stuff. I know there's some brilliant guys out there, and mostly on this conference at the moment. So thanks very much for everything you do. We don't understand the ins and outs by a long way, but we just know you're trying to make it all work for us, and that's greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah. Better get that battery out of that machine, Steve, in the loft.
Well, in the intervening time, James has actually moved back to the UK, so I should probably pester him about that.
That would be lovely, because I mean, even to have reverse engineer a protocol, guys, I mean, I love you, but you have received some bad words some of those nights. Not personal.
Yeah, we didn't write ShareFest.
No, I know. That there were a couple of things that were like, what did they do it this way? But yeah, it's working, and it's mostly working out there. We have the user here. When I can install it, it's mostly working, and it has asynchronous I/O. It can serve a lot of machines. Pretty cool. Like, actually, I think a lot of people will be very happy with it, because with a little laptop, you can serve an impressive amount of machines. The power of Rust, it's very secure, so no issues there, and it can serve a lot of machines because asynchronous I/O, multi-threading is pretty powerful. But there was something, there was something Acorn did. Actually, ShareFS is not even Acorn, so, but who did ShareFS has received a couple of Italian bad words.
That's a pity. It's one of my favourite parts of RISC OS. The fact that it quietly works. Whenever you bring up a RISC OS machine, suddenly you can see all the disks in the house, just like that.
It's a very cool. Don't get me wrong, it's a very cool thing. But some of the things in it are.
Yeah, it's the swan on top of the water. You don't want to look at the legs.
No, I don't know. I'm in a boat. I'm not looking, not taking the feet in even.
There's quite a lot of that on RISC OS. But anyway, I hope my presentation today, I hope it wasn't too technical and dry, but I hope it was useful. And it's great to see so many people on the call. And it's I've enjoyed being able to talk to you about what's going on. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll
thank you,
drop
Steve.
off now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone. Good evening.
Bye. Good evening. Bye.
Bye.
There he was, gone.
Well.